According to the Sioux tradition, humans, plants, and animals all come from Mother Earth, and all living beings share the same spiritual essence, the Wakan Tonka. Members of the Sioux tribe have always been activists for environmental preservation, from the time European colonists arrived in America to today, as American oil companies threatened to violate laws protecting Native American sovereignty by building oil pipelines across the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota.
The Dakota Access Oil Pipeline is something that's been argued over for years, but just recently the clash between protesters and the builders turned violent.
Security has some kind of gas. People are being pepper sprayed.
Let's start from the beginning. Our world runs on oil, and nobody uses more of it than the United States, with 7 billion barrels worth in 2015, which was more than 20% of the global total. Increasingly, America is becoming dependent on oil pipelines to move crude and refined oil across the U.S. But while our nearly 70,000 miles of pipelines facilitate the transport of oil for heating homes and fueling cars, they also have an incredibly complex and potentially detrimental impact both on the environment and on the communities surrounding the pipelines. Since the North Dakota Access Pipeline has not yet been completed, there's limited data on the exact environmental impacts it would have on the surrounding regions. However, we can examine the impacts that similar pipelines have had on their environments in order to predict the potential environmental effects of the North Dakota Access Pipeline. For example, the North Dakota Access Pipeline is slated to run beneath the Missouri River, a source of drinking water for millions of Americans. If this pipeline were to leak, as Enbridge Incorporated's pipeline under the Kalamazoo River did in 2010, the government would face millions of dollars in environmental remediation costs. In the short term, thousands of birds would die as oil coats their feathers and prevents them from keeping themselves warm. Freshwater fish experience impeded growth, respiratory malfunction, and stunted larval development. Bottom-dwelling invertebrates face issues like impeded shell development, and while they can often survive oil contamination, biomagnification causes these toxins to build up in higher trophic level organisms like otters. In the long term, this can cause tumors and other diseases in these organisms. In terms of human health, exposure to oil can cause neurological problems like slurred speech and dizziness, and long-term exposure to benzene, a known carcinogen, can cause leukemia and other cancers. These consequences on animal and human health must be considered when thinking about the future of the North Dakota Access Pipeline, as pipelines everywhere have the potential to spring catastrophic leaks, and pollution from these pipelines is dangerously common. These detrimental impacts extend to the surrounding vegetation as well. According to research conducted in China at the Kazakhstan-China pipeline, a pipeline similar to the North Dakota Access Pipeline, the construction of the pipeline itself severely impacted vegetation growth up to 300 meters away from the construction site, as plants were trampled, removed, or damaged by the construction process. Soil quality was impacted up to 30 meters away, severely impeding the ecosystem's ability to support plant life after the pipeline was completed. The harmful effects the construction of the Kazakhstan-China pipeline had on the surrounding environment reflects the potential damage that the construction of the North Dakota Access Pipeline would have on the environment if the government allows it to be constructed. And those are just the localized environmental impacts. In terms of increased consumption, research has proven that for every additional barrel of oil produced, global consumption rises by about 0.6 barrels in response to lower oil prices. The Dakota Access Pipeline is projected to transport an additional 470,000 barrels of oil per day, potentially raising consumption in the United States by over 1 billion barrels a year. This increased consumption would add millions of tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere each day, directly contributing to climate change and the acidification of our rain and oceans. Those in favor of the Dakota Access Pipeline retort, saying it would add about 30,000 jobs and $1 billion in revenue to the Midwest. But more environmentally friendly energy alternatives could have a similar impact within that region, without threatening the local ecosystem. More than 1/3 of the U.S.'s wind energy supply comes from the Midwestern states, and surveys conducted in regions where the Dakota Access Pipeline is slated to be constructed suggest that upwards of 60% of residents would be open to more renewable energy expansion in the region. Although the Dakota Access Pipeline would be an economic boom to North Dakota, the widespread ecological and social problems it would create are ultimately not worth the financial benefits. So what can be done? There is hope. On December 4th, the Army Corps of Engineers announced that they will reroute the pipeline away from tribal lands. However, while rerouting the pipeline represents a tremendous victory for the Sioux, the construction of the pipeline will still have drastic effects on the environment. As such, it's still important to advocate for alternatives to oil pipelines. Write to your local senators and congressmen about the dangers of our dependence on oil, spread awareness of the pipeline's dangers within your community, and support the expansion of renewable energy sources like wind and solar and hydropower. With your help, we can preserve Standing Rock Reservation and the Great Plains for years to come.